Look, I'm literally still trying to process everything that happened because if you had told me a year ago that my marriage would end like this, I would have laughed in your face. My name's Ethan Carter. I'm 42. I live just outside Dallas. And until recently, I honestly thought I had one of those lives people secretly envied. My wife, Lauren, and I had been married for 14 years. We built a real estate investment company together from almost nothing. We owned apartment buildings, commercial properties, vacation homes, investment accounts, the whole thing. On paper, our combined net worth was around $7 million. dollars. We weren't celebrities or anything, but we never worried about money. At least I thought that meant we never had to worry about each other either. Man, I couldn't have been more wrong. Lauren always had this way of making everyone feel like she was the nicest person in the room. She volunteered at charity events, remembered everyone's birthdays, baked cookies for neighbors. People absolutely loved her. If somebody had asked me who was more likely to betray the other, I would have pointed at myself before I ever pointed at her. That's how much I trusted her. Looking back now, that's probably the biggest mistake I ever made. Trust makes you blind to things that should have been obvious. It started with tiny stuff that didn't seem worth arguing about. She suddenly became obsessed with going to the gym twice a day. She changed her phone password after using the same one for years. She started taking business trips that somehow never included pictures anymore. Every time I walked into a room, she'd flip her phone over. If I asked who she was texting, she'd laugh and say, "Relax, you're acting paranoid." And honestly, I believed her because I didn't want the alternative to be true. Then one Friday night, everything cracked wide open. Lauren told me she was flying to Austin for a real estate conference. She even packed a suitcase in front of me and kissed me goodbye before leaving for the airport. Around 9 that evening, one of my tenants called because of a plumbing emergency at one of our buildings downtown. I drove over there myself instead of sending maintenance because it was supposedly quicker. After dealing with the leak, I stopped at a rooftop bar nearby to grab a drink before heading home. That's where I saw her. Not in Austin, not at some conference. She was sitting 3 tables away with a guy I'd never seen before. They weren't talking business. They were holding hands across the table like teenagers. Then she leaned over and kissed him. Not some quick peck either. It was the kind of kiss you don't accidentally give someone. I swear everything around me went silent. I couldn't even hear the music anymore. My first instinct was to storm over there and flip the damn table. Instead, I sat back down, pulled out my phone, and started recording. For almost 40 minutes, I watched them laugh, drink expensive wine, and make plans for a weekend they apparently thought I'd never know about. They left together holding hands. I followed them from a distance until they walked into a luxury hotel a few blocks away. I took pictures of everything. The valet, the entrance, them checking in together. Every single second felt like someone driving a knife deeper into my chest, but I kept thinking the same thing over and over. Don't lose your temper. Don't give her the satisfaction. Just keep collecting proof. When I finally got home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my laptop instead. The first thing I did was pull our financial records. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop even further. Over the previous 8 months, there had been dozens of transfers from our joint accounts that I'd barely noticed because they were mixed in with business expenses, designer stores, hotel bookings, luxury restaurants, jewelry purchases, tens of thousands of dollars. She hadn't just been cheating. She'd been using our money to fund the affair. I barely slept that night. Around 6 in the morning, Lauren called me from what she claimed was her hotel room in Austin. She complained about the conference schedule, said she'd miss me, and even joked that she'd bring me back my favorite barbecue sauce from a local place. I sat there listening to her lie without missing a beat. I even told her I loved her before hanging up. Looking back, that was probably the hardest sentence I've ever said. The next Monday, I quietly hired one of the best divorce attorneys in Texas. I expected him to tell me we'd split everything, 50-50, maybe a little more in my favor because of the affair. Instead, after reviewing everything I'd collected, he leaned back in his chair and asked one question that completely changed the direction of my life. Tell me, Ethan, how far are you willing to go to make sure she doesn't walk away with your fortune? I thought he was speaking hypothetically. I had no idea that question would lead me to a plan so ruthless it would eventually require convincing Lauren's own lover to help destroy her in court. All right, so where was I? Yeah, sitting across from my attorney, trying to figure out whether he was being serious or just testing me. And while he wasn't smiling, he spread out copies of our bank statements, property records, tax returns, and all the evidence I'd gathered from that night. Then he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Winning a divorce isn't about who cries harder. It's about who has better evidence, better timing, and fewer surprises." I asked him what he meant by that last part. He tapped the picture of Lauren kissing the guy outside the hotel. "You know almost nothing about him. Before you make a single move, we need to know everything." That made sense. If this guy had a wife, kids, a career, or financial problems, every one of those details could change how this whole thing played out. So, I hired a private investigator. Within 2 weeks, I had a file almost an inch thick. His name was Ryan Mitchell, 36 years old, worked as a luxury home contractor, divorced, behind on taxes, buried under business loans, owed money to multiple creditors after several projects had gone sideways. His company was barely surviving, but he kept pretending everything was great by leasing expensive trucks and wearing designer watches he couldn't really afford. The investigator also found hundreds of messages between Ryan and Lauren. They weren't talking about love. That was probably the weirdest part. Most of their conversations were about money. Lauren kept promising him that once the divorce happened, they'd finally be free and that she'd be walking away with millions. She even joked in one message that I'd spent years building their retirement fund. That sentence did something to me. Up until then, I was heartbroken. After reading that, I got angry. Not the kind of angry where you punch walls, the quiet kind, the dangerous kind where every emotion just freezes into one single goal. A few days later, I asked the investigator to arrange something unusual. I wanted to meet Ryan alone. No threats, no yelling, no surprises. Just a conversation. I figured he'd either refuse or immediately tell Lauren. Instead, he showed up. We met at a quiet steakhouse outside the city. He looked nervous from the second he walked in. He obviously recognized me from photos Lauren had shown him. Before he could say a word, I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were photographs, the hotel, the rooftop bar, the text messages, bank transfers, a timeline of almost everything they'd done together. His face went completely pale. "I can explain," he finally muttered. I laughed. "I'm not here for an explanation." For nearly an hour, I asked him questions, and little by little, the entire fantasy Lauren had built started falling apart. She'd told Ryan our marriage had been dead for years. She claimed I controlled all the money. She promised him that once the divorce was over, they'd buy a beach house in Florida together and never have to work again. Then I asked him the one question he clearly wasn't expecting. "Has she ever shown you proof that she'll actually get half?" He blinked. "No." "Did she ever tell you how much debt comes with some of these properties?" Silence. "Did she ever mention that several of our investments are tied up in complicated business agreements?" Another long silence. The guy honestly had no clue. Lauren had been selling him a fantasy the entire time. When I finished laying everything out, Ryan leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. "So, she lied to both of us." "Looks that way." For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed. "I ruined my life for someone who was playing both sides." I nodded. So did I. Walking out of that restaurant, I realized something I'd never expected. Ryan wasn't some criminal mastermind. He was another idiot who'd believed Lauren's version of reality, and judging by the look on his face, he was beginning to hate her almost as much as I did. As I watched him drive away, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lauren. "Miss you already. Conference is exhausting. Love you." I stared at that message for a solid minute before typing back exactly 3 words. Love you too. She had absolutely no idea that less than 2 hours earlier, the man she'd risked our entire marriage for had just admitted she'd been lying to him from the very beginning. And the next call I received from Ryan would completely change the direction of this divorce in a way I never saw coming. All right, so where was I? A couple of days after that dinner, Ryan called me. I honestly expected him to tell me to stay away from him or threaten to warn Lauren. Instead, the first thing he said was, "Can we meet again? There's something you need to know." That wasn't exactly what I was expecting. We met in the parking lot of a coffee shop about 40 minutes outside Dallas. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He got into my truck without saying a word, shut the door, and just sat there staring out the windshield. Finally, he took a deep breath. "I think Lauren's planning something." I didn't interrupt him. He pulled out his phone and opened a string of messages. Lauren had been asking strange questions over the previous few weeks. Not about the relationship, about money. She wanted to know when would be the perfect time to file for divorce. She asked whether he knew anyone who could temporarily hold cash. She even joked that once she got her settlement, she'd never have to deal with Ethan's boring business brain again. Then Ryan looked at me and said something that completely changed how I saw the situation. She wanted me to help her hide part of the money after the divorce. I just stared at him. "What?" He nodded. She said if she moved some of the settlement through one of my business accounts for a while, nobody would ask questions. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just cheating anymore. She was talking about concealing assets after a court judgment. Ryan shook his head. I never agreed. Honestly, I figured she was just talking. But after meeting you, I started thinking about everything she's told me over the last year. He unlocked another folder on his phone. Screenshots, voice recordings, photos she'd sent him, calendar entries. There was way more than I'd ever managed to collect. Apparently, Lauren loved documenting everything. She sent him screenshots of our investment portfolio, photos from inside our home office, even pictures of confidential business paperwork she'd snapped while I was asleep or traveling. Every time she found out about a new investment or property acquisition, she'd brag to him about how much richer they were going to become. Ryan looked embarrassed. I should have deleted all this months ago. Instead of answering, I called my attorney right there from the truck. He listened quietly for almost 10 minutes before saying, "Don't forward anything yet. Preserve every file exactly as it exists. Metadata matters." Within 48 hours, Ryan met directly with my legal team. Nobody pressured him. Nobody threatened him. He came voluntarily. Over the next several hours, he signed a sworn statement explaining exactly what Lauren had told him during the affair. He identified the messages, confirmed dates, explained the discussions about hiding future assets and using his business account. He even admitted that Lauren believed she would receive millions after the divorce, and had already started planning how they'd spend it together. When he finished, my attorney quietly closed the folder. I don't think Ms. Carter realizes how serious this has become. Neither did I. A week later, Lauren finally made her move. She came home acting strangely sweet. She cooked my favorite dinner, opened an expensive bottle of wine, spent the whole evening talking about taking a vacation together because we'd both been working too hard. If I hadn't already known everything, I probably would have believed every word. Then, almost casually, she asked if I'd sign a few updated business documents because our accountant supposedly needed them before the end of the month. I recognized the paperwork immediately. They weren't routine forms. Buried inside the stack were amendments that would have shifted ownership percentages on several of our biggest investment properties. Not enough to look suspicious. Just enough that if I'd signed without reading, she'd have a much stronger argument during the divorce. I smiled, signed the page, acknowledging receipt of the documents, and left every ownership page completely blank. She noticed almost immediately. "Oh, you forgot these." I looked down. Oh, you're right. Then I folded the papers back into the envelope. I'll review them with our attorney this week before signing. For the first time since we'd been married, I saw genuine panic flash across her face. It lasted maybe half a second. Then the smile came right back. Of course, honey. Whatever makes you comfortable. She kissed me on the cheek before heading upstairs. The second she disappeared, my phone vibrated. It was my attorney. Only 3 words. She just filed. Lauren had officially started the divorce before I could. What she didn't know was that nearly every move she'd planned for months had already been documented, and one of the key witnesses she expected to stand beside her was now preparing to testify against her instead. All right, so where was I? Lauren had beaten me to the courthouse by a few hours, but instead of panicking, my attorney actually smiled when he saw the filing. I remember looking at him like he'd completely lost his mind. I asked him how this could possibly be good news. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Because she just committed herself to a version of events that she's going to have to defend under oath." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant, but over the next few weeks it became painfully clear. Lauren's entire strategy depended on convincing the court that she had always acted honestly, that our marriage had simply fallen apart, and that every financial decision she'd made had been for the benefit of our family. The problem for her was that we'd already built an entire timeline showing something completely different. The financial discovery process started almost immediately. Both sides had to disclose assets, business interests, investments, debts, and years of financial records. Lauren acted unbelievably confident. Every time our lawyers met, she'd walk into the conference room dressed like she was heading to a magazine photo shoot. She'd smile at me, ask how I was doing, and pretend none of this was personal. If someone had walked in without knowing the situation, they would have thought we were negotiating a business deal instead of ending a 14-year marriage. But every now and then she'd look at me just a little too long, almost like she was trying to figure out why I wasn't begging her to come back. That probably bothered her more than anything. She expected tears. She expected rage. Instead, I gave her absolutely nothing. Then came the depositions. If you've never been through one, imagine sitting in a room for hours while lawyers ask question after question, knowing every answer is being recorded. Lauren stuck to the same story over and over. She claimed our marriage had been emotionally over for years. She denied using marital funds for anyone other than the family. She insisted she'd never discussed future financial plans with another man. She even swore she'd never shared confidential business information with anyone outside our company. Every answer sounded polished, almost rehearsed. I sat there listening without reacting because my attorney had warned me beforehand. Don't interrupt. Don't argue. Let her finish building the rope. It was some of the hardest self-control I've ever had in my life. A few days later, my attorney invited me into his office. Spread across his conference table were printed transcripts from Lauren's deposition on one side and stacks of evidence on the other. Every lie she'd told had a matching piece of proof waiting beside it. Screenshots, bank transfers, hotel receipts, time-stamped photographs, voice messages, even calendar entries. It looked less like a divorce case and more like investigators building a criminal file. My attorney pointed to one page where Lauren had denied ever discussing how she'd spend money after the divorce. Then he placed Ryan's sworn statement next to it, followed by several messages in which Lauren talked about buying a beach house, paying off his debts, and using my half of our estate to start a new life together. This, my attorney said quietly, is exactly why you never interrupt someone who's willing to lie under oath. I still hadn't spoken to Ryan since he'd given his statement. Honestly, I wasn't sure I ever wanted to again. Then one evening he called me unexpectedly. He sounded exhausted. "I think you should know she's trying to contact me again." I asked what she wanted. He gave a bitter laugh. "She's nervous. She keeps asking whether anyone has ever asked me questions about the relationship. She keeps reminding me that we need to stay consistent if anyone ever talks to us." Hearing that made my stomach turn. Even now, with the divorce already underway, she wasn't trying to tell the truth. She was trying to coordinate stories. Ryan told me he hadn't answered most of her messages. Then he said something I never expected to hear. I deserve whatever people think of me, Ethan, but I'm done lying for her. When the call ended, I realized the woman I'd spent 14 years trusting no longer had a single person she could fully rely on. Several weeks later, our attorneys exchanged witness lists before the next hearing. Lauren's side listed accountants, valuation experts, and a few business associates. Nothing surprising. Then I looked at our witness list. Halfway down the page was a name I hadn't expected my attorney to include until much later: Ryan Mitchell. I looked up from the document and asked if that was intentional. My attorney smiled without saying a word. A few hours later, Lauren's attorney requested an emergency meeting. Apparently, they had just realized who Ryan was and what his testimony might include. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, the confidence on Lauren's side started to crack. The emergency meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. I wasn't present, but afterward my attorney filled me in. Lauren's legal team had suddenly become very interested in discussing settlement options. They hinted that maybe both sides could avoid a long public trial. Maybe everything could be divided quickly and quietly. Maybe there was room for compromise after all. My attorney listened politely to every proposal before standing up, gathering his files, and ending the meeting with one sentence: "We'll continue preparing for trial." When he told me that later, I asked why he hadn't at least listened to the numbers. He looked directly at me and said, "Because that wasn't a negotiation. That was panic." 2 days after that meeting, something happened that nobody on our side had anticipated. I woke up to more than 30 missed calls from friends, business contacts, and even my younger sister. Confused, I opened my phone and immediately saw why. Overnight, someone had anonymously leaked a series of accusations online, claiming that I had secretly manipulated company finances throughout our marriage. The posts painted me as controlling, abusive, and obsessed with money. They spread incredibly fast, and within hours, people who had known us for years were asking questions. At first glance, it looked like someone had launched a desperate smear campaign. Then my attorney called and said, "Don't respond to a single person. We just found out where those posts originated." He paused for a second before adding, "And if we're right, this may end up hurting Lauren far more than it hurts you." All right, so where was I? My attorney had just told me not to respond to anyone, no matter what they were saying online. That went against every instinct I had. People I'd known for years were suddenly asking whether I'd stolen money from my own company. Former clients were sending messages that started with, "I really hope this isn't true." Even my own cousin called asking if I needed a criminal defense lawyer. That's how fast the rumors spread. My attorney explained exactly why staying quiet mattered. "If this was coordinated," he said, "someone wants you emotional. They want you posting, arguing, threatening people, or accidentally saying something that can be twisted later. Don't give them that." So I shut my phone off and let my legal team handle everything. It was probably the longest 48 hours of my life. Then the digital forensic investigators finished tracing the posts. Whoever had uploaded the accusations had tried to hide behind fake accounts and anonymous email addresses, but they got sloppy. One of the accounts had been created using the Wi-Fi at a luxury condominium building downtown. That alone didn't prove anything. What made everyone's attention snap into focus was the security footage the investigators obtained through a subpoena. Lauren was there. She hadn't posted the messages herself. Instead, she had walked into the building carrying a laptop and spent nearly 2 hours inside Ryan's old condo. Except Ryan hadn't lived there for almost 3 months. He'd moved out after realizing he couldn't afford the lease. The apartment belonged to one of Lauren's friends. That same friend happened to work in digital marketing. Suddenly, the anonymous campaign didn't look anonymous anymore. When Lauren's attorney received the investigator's report, something changed almost overnight. The aggressive emails stopped. The ridiculous demands stopped. Even the constant threats about taking half of everything disappeared. Instead, they asked for another settlement conference. This time, My attorney actually let me attend. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different from the first meeting. Lauren looked exhausted. The confident smile she'd worn for weeks was gone. Her attorney did almost all the talking. We believe both parties would benefit from resolving this privately. My attorney nodded. What exactly are you proposing? Lauren's attorney slid a folder across the table. Their proposal was dramatically different. She was now willing to accept significantly less than an equal division if we agreed to strict confidentiality. My attorney barely looked at the numbers before closing the folder. No, Lauren finally spoke. What do you mean, no? You've spent months accusing my client of financial misconduct, my attorney replied calmly. You've denied the affair under oath. You've denied spending marital funds. You've denied discussing post-divorce financial plans. And now that the evidence is catching up to those statements, suddenly, you want confidentiality. Lauren turned toward me. Ethan, can we please just talk? Just us? It was the first time she'd used my name without pretending everything was fine. I looked at my attorney. He gave a tiny shake of his head. I have nothing to discuss outside legal counsel. For a second, I thought she was going to cry. Instead, she became angry. You planned this? No, I answered quietly. You planned this. I just stopped getting in your way. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, the meeting ended without an agreement. As we walked toward the parking garage afterward, Ryan was waiting outside with his own attorney. He'd been there for another matter related to his witness preparation. Lauren froze the moment she saw him. She marched straight toward him. You sold me out. Ryan didn't raise his voice. No, I finally stopped lying. You promised you'd always have my back. He laughed once, but there wasn't anything funny about it. You promised me we'd build a future together. She didn't answer. You promised me your marriage was already over. Still nothing. You promised me the money would solve everything. He looked directly at her. Turns out the only thing you were actually good at was making promises. Lauren stared at him for what felt like forever, before walking away, without another word. Watching that exchange was surreal. The two people who had spent nearly a year lying to me were now blaming each other for the collapse of the fantasy they'd built together. A month later, the trial finally began. The first few days focused on business valuations, property records, and financial experts. It was complicated, technical, and honestly pretty boring. Then came witness testimony. Ryan was scheduled to testify on the fourth day. The courtroom was noticeably quieter that morning. Even the judge commented that there seemed to be more spectators than usual. Ryan took the oath, sat down, and answered the basic background questions without hesitation. Then my attorney asked one simple question. Mr. Mitchell, during your relationship with Ms. Carter, did she ever discuss what she expected to receive after divorcing my client? Ryan took a slow breath. Yes. And what exactly did she tell you? Ryan looked toward Lauren for only a brief second before turning back to the attorney. The answer he gave next caused Lauren's attorney to stand up so fast that his chair crashed backward onto the courtroom floor. All right, so where was I? Ryan had just taken the stand, and the entire courtroom went dead silent after my attorney asked what Lauren had told him about the divorce. Ryan didn't rush his answer. He looked down for a second, almost like he was trying to remember the exact words instead of paraphrasing them. She told me she was going to leave her husband, he said. She said she'd be getting millions once the divorce was over. She told me we'd buy a house together in Florida, pay off my business debts, and start over. Lauren's attorney shot to his feet. Objection. Hearsay. The judge looked over the file for a moment before responding. Overruled. The testimony is admissible for the limited purposes previously discussed. The witness may continue. Ryan nodded. There wasn't just one conversation. We talked about it dozens of times. My attorney walked over with a stack of exhibits. Do you recognize Exhibit 41? Yes. What is it? A screenshot of messages between Lauren and me. Did you alter those messages in any way? No. Were they accurately preserved from your phone? Yes. One by one, the messages appeared on the courtroom monitors. Once I get my half, we're done worrying about money forever. He has no idea what's coming. 7 million looks a lot better when you're only sharing it with one person instead of two. Lauren stared straight ahead. She didn't even look at the screen. Then came the voice recordings. Ryan explained that he had a habit of recording business meetings because he'd once been involved in a contract dispute. Sometimes he'd forget to turn the recorder off afterward. One evening, after dinner with Lauren, the recorder had kept running inside his truck. The audio wasn't dramatic. If anything, that made it worse. Lauren casually talked about our investments, joked about how careful I was with money, and laughed while saying that I'd spent years building their future. Nobody in the courtroom spoke while the recording played. When it ended, my attorney asked one final question. Did Mr. Carter ever ask you to lie in court? No. Did he ever threaten you? No. Did he ever offer you money in exchange for false testimony? Ryan answered immediately. No. He asked me for the truth. That sentence landed harder than anything else he'd said all morning. Lauren's attorney began cross-examination almost immediately. Mr. Mitchell, isn't it true that you're deeply in debt? Yes. And isn't it true that cooperating with Mr. Carter could potentially improve your own legal situation? No. So you're saying you have absolutely nothing to gain? Ryan looked directly at him. I've already lost my relationship, my reputation, several friends, and most of my business. There isn't much left to gain. The attorney changed direction. Didn't Mr. Carter meet with you privately before these proceedings? Yes. And during that meeting, did he attempt to influence your testimony? Ryan shook his head. He showed me evidence that Lauren had lied to both of us. After that, I hired my own attorney before speaking with anyone else. That answer seemed to take the wind out of the cross-examination. After another 20 minutes, Ryan stepped down from the witness stand. I honestly thought the hardest part was over. It wasn't. That afternoon, Lauren herself testified. She remained calm through the first hour. She denied intentionally misusing marital funds. She claimed many of the hotel charges were legitimate business expenses. She insisted the messages with Ryan had been taken out of context. Then my attorney approached with a thick binder. Mrs. Carter, earlier today you testified under oath that you never shared confidential financial information with Mr. Mitchell. Is that still your testimony? Yes. He opened the binder. Your Honor, we'd like to publish Exhibit 67. The courtroom monitors lit up again. This time it wasn't a text message. It was a photograph. A photograph Lauren herself had taken of my computer monitor while I was working late in our home office. On the screen was a confidential spreadsheet listing our investment portfolio, projected cash flow, pending acquisitions, and internal business valuations. My attorney spoke quietly. Mrs. Carter, is that your photograph? Lauren didn't answer. He asked again. Is that your photograph? Yes. And did you send it to Mr. Mitchell approximately 4 minutes after taking it? Another long pause. Yes. You previously testified that you never shared confidential business information outside your company. He waited. I'd like to remind you that you're still under oath. Lauren looked toward her attorney. He didn't say a word. For the first time since the trial began, she looked genuinely frightened. Then my attorney reached into another folder and said, Very well, Mrs. Carter. Let's move to the next exhibit. This one concerns the draft agreement you tried to have Mr. Carter sign just days before filing for divorce. The expression on Lauren's face changed instantly. Whatever she thought was in that folder, she clearly hadn't expected anyone else to have it. All right, so where was I? The second my attorney mentioned those documents, Lauren completely froze. It wasn't the kind of reaction you can fake. Her shoulders tensed, her eyes widened for just a split second, and then she looked at her attorney like she was silently begging him to stop whatever was about to happen. My attorney held up the packet. Mrs. Carter, Do you recognize these documents? She swallowed. They look like business paperwork. More specifically? I'd have to read them. He walked over and handed her a copy. Take your time. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people shifting in their seats. After nearly a minute, she finally nodded. Yes, I recognize them. Did you present these documents to your husband approximately 6 days before filing for divorce? Yes. And what did you tell him they were? I said they were routine updates requested by our accountant. Were they? Another pause. They were business related. That wasn't my question. He waited. Were they routine accounting updates? No. He turned toward the judge. Your Honor, Exhibit 73 includes the proposed ownership amendments prepared before the divorce petition was filed. The documents appeared on the courtroom screens. Even I hadn't realized how carefully my attorney had prepared this part. Each page was displayed next to the company's existing ownership records. The highlighted differences were impossible to miss. Had I signed those papers without reading them, Lauren's ownership interest in several of our highest performing investment entities would have increased substantially, while mine would have been reduced. Not enough to attract immediate suspicion, just enough to affect millions of dollars in asset valuation. My attorney looked back at Lauren. Did you explain these ownership changes to your husband before asking him to sign? No. Did you tell him they would materially change the distribution of business interests? No. Why not? Lauren hesitated. I didn't think he'd understand all the details. For the first time during the trial, I actually heard someone in the gallery laugh. The judge immediately called for order. My attorney continued without changing his tone. So, your position is that the co-founder of these businesses wouldn't understand changes to his own ownership interests? Lauren realized how ridiculous that sounded the moment the words left her mouth. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She couldn't answer. Instead, her attorney stood. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge replied. Counsel, move on. My attorney nodded politely. No further questions on this exhibit. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. He walked back to counsel table, picked up another binder, and returned. Mrs. Carter, I'd like to discuss your communications with Mr. Mitchell after this divorce was filed. Lauren's attorney immediately objected again. The judge overruled it. My attorney displayed another series of messages. These weren't romantic. They were desperate. Nobody can know we talked about the money. Delete everything. If anyone asks, we never discussed the divorce. We're both ruined if those messages ever come out. Lauren closed her eyes. My attorney asked quietly, Mrs. Carter, why were you asking Mr. Mitchell to delete communications if everything you've testified to today is accurate? I was emotional. Were you emotional, or were you worried the messages contradicted your testimony? I disagree with that characterization. Mrs. Carter, that's not an answer. She looked at the judge, then back at the screen. Finally, she whispered, I didn't want private conversations becoming public. My attorney didn't press further. He simply nodded. No further questions. When Lauren stepped down from the witness stand, she looked completely different from the woman who had walked into court that morning. The confidence was gone. The polished smile was gone. She wouldn't even look in my direction. Court adjourned for the day shortly afterward. As everyone filed out, my attorney asked me to stay behind for a few minutes. Once the courtroom had mostly emptied, he closed his folder and leaned toward me. I've been doing this for 28 years. I waited. I've rarely seen a witness damage her own credibility this badly. So, what happens now? The judge will review all the evidence before issuing findings on the disputed issues. I nodded. But there's something else. He slid one final document across the table. It wasn't from Lauren. It wasn't from Ryan. It had come from one of the forensic accountants. Across the top, in bold letters, was a summary of every dollar of marital money investigators had traced to Lauren's affair. Hotels, flights, jewelry, luxury gifts, vacation rentals, vehicle payments, private club memberships. The total sat at the bottom of the page. I stared at it for several seconds. I knew she'd spent money. I never imagined the number would be that high. My attorney quietly tapped the last page. If the court accepts this analysis, it could significantly affect how the marital estate is divided. Before I could respond, the courtroom clerk walked over. The judge would like to see counsel in chambers. My attorney gathered the files, looked at me, and said something that instantly made my heart start racing. I think we're about to find out whether this case is going to end with a negotiated settlement or with a ruling neither side will ever forget. All right, so where was I? After the clerk told us the judge wanted to see the attorneys in chambers, I stayed behind in the empty courtroom. Those 20 minutes felt longer than the entire trial. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering whether we'd missed something, whether some technicality was about to undo months of work. When my attorney finally came back, he wasn't smiling, but he definitely wasn't upset either. He sat down beside me and loosened his tie. What happened? I asked. The judge had questions for both sides about the financial tracing report. And? He wanted to know whether Lauren disputes the numbers. I waited. She doesn't. That caught me completely off guard. What do you mean she doesn't? Her attorney admitted they can't seriously challenge most of the expenditures. The records are too well documented. I leaned back in my chair. So, she admits she spent marital money on the affair? Essentially, yes. That was the first time during the entire case I felt like we were actually approaching the finish line. The next morning was reserved for closing arguments. Lauren looked completely different from the woman I'd married. She wasn't wearing the expensive designer outfits anymore. Her makeup barely covered how exhausted she looked. She spent most of the morning staring at the table, while her attorney argued that, despite mistakes made during the marriage, fairness required an equal division of the marital estate. He acknowledged the affair. He acknowledged inappropriate spending. He even admitted Lauren had exercised poor judgment in several respects. But he insisted none of that justified stripping her of her financial future. Then it was our turn. My attorney stood, thanked the court, and walked slowly toward the center of the courtroom. This case is not about punishing infidelity, he began. People unfortunately betray one another every day. Courts do not divide property based on heartbreak. This case is about deception, misuse of marital assets, false testimony, and repeated attempts to manipulate financial records immediately before litigation. He didn't raise his voice once. Instead, he carefully walked through the evidence, the hotel receipts, the transfers, the confidential business information, the proposed ownership amendments, the messages discussing future plans, the request to delete evidence. Every point was supported by an exhibit already admitted into evidence. When he finished, he closed his folder and said one sentence that stayed with me. The court is not being asked to reward my client. It is being asked not to reward misconduct. The hearing ended just before lunch. The judge thanked both sides and announced he would issue a written ruling after reviewing the complete record. Then we waited. Those next 3 weeks were torture. Life didn't simply pause because a divorce was pending. I still had employees asking about projects. Banks wanted signatures. Tenants needed approvals. Friends kept calling to ask how everything was going. I answered almost nobody. Every morning I'd wake up hoping my attorney would call. Every afternoon I'd check my phone a dozen times. Every evening I'd convince myself the decision would probably come tomorrow. Lauren reached out twice during that time. The first message simply read, "Can we please end this peacefully?" I never replied. A week later, another text arrived. I never wanted it to go this far. I stared at those words for a long time before locking my phone again. There wasn't really anything left to say. One Monday morning, my attorney finally called. The court has issued the ruling. His voice gave absolutely nothing away. I grabbed my keys without even asking questions and drove straight to his office. When I walked in, a thick packet was sitting on the conference table, nearly 80 pages. The judge had addressed every disputed issue one by one. My attorney slid the decision toward me. I think you should read the conclusion yourself. My hands were shaking as I flipped toward the final section. The judge spent several pages explaining the credibility of the witnesses. He specifically discussed inconsistencies in Lauren's testimony, compared them with the documentary evidence, and explained why certain statements could not be relied upon. Ryan's testimony wasn't treated as perfect, but the court noted that it was substantially corroborated by independent evidence, including financial records, electronic communications, and photographs. The forensic accounting report was also accepted as reliable after extensive review. Then I reached the section that actually mattered: property division. I took a deep breath and started reading. About halfway through the first paragraph, I suddenly stopped. I looked up at my attorney. "There has to be more." He nodded slowly. "Oh, there is." He turned the page for me. The next section explains exactly why the judge reached that conclusion. And according to my attorney, those next few pages contained language that neither Lauren nor her legal team had expected to read when they decided to take this case all the way to trial. All right, so where was I? I was sitting in my attorney's office with the judge's decision in front of me. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I honestly thought I was about to read, "The marital estate shall be divided equally," followed by a bunch of legal language. That's what everyone had warned me would probably happen, no matter how ugly the affair had been. Instead, the first sentence of the judge's analysis hit me like a truck. The court found that Lauren had deliberately concealed material facts during the proceedings, repeatedly provided testimony that conflicted with reliable documentary evidence, and had knowingly spent substantial marital funds in furtherance of the extramarital relationship. I kept reading. The judge explained that the affair itself wasn't the deciding factor. What mattered was everything that surrounded it: the hidden spending, the attempted ownership changes shortly before filing for divorce, the disclosure of confidential business information, the inconsistent testimony under oath. Every issue by itself might not have changed the outcome dramatically. Together, they painted a picture the court simply couldn't ignore. I looked over at my attorney. "So, what does this actually mean?" He pointed farther down the page. "Keep reading." The ruling continued by addressing every major asset individually: the apartment complexes, the office building, the commercial warehouses, the brokerage accounts, the business itself. Rather than simply assigning percentages, the judge carefully analyzed who had originally managed each asset, who continued operating it during the litigation, and how the documented misuse of marital funds should be taken into account when reaching an equitable division. It took me nearly 20 minutes to finish that section. By the time I reached the last page, I honestly had to read the conclusion twice because I thought I was misunderstanding it. My attorney finally broke the silence. "No," he almost laughed. "You read it correctly." For months, I'd been preparing myself for the possibility of selling buildings, liquidating investments, and starting over from scratch. Instead, the court awarded me control of virtually every operating business entity we'd spent 14 years building. Several investment properties remained with me as part of the overall distribution after the court balanced the remaining assets, liabilities, reimbursements, and financial findings across the estate. Lauren wasn't left with the future she'd spent months planning. Not even close. The financial adjustments, reimbursements ordered by the court, debt allocations, and valuation findings completely destroyed the picture she'd been counting on. I sat there staring at the paperwork. "I don't understand." My attorney folded his hands. She expected the affair to stay hidden. She expected the spending to stay hidden. She expected the ownership documents to be signed. She expected Ryan to support her version of events. Every major assumption she made collapsed. He wasn't celebrating. He was simply stating facts. "The judge didn't reward you because you were betrayed," he continued. "He reached a conclusion based on the evidence presented." For the first time in almost a year, I could finally breathe. 3 days later, we returned to court for the final administrative hearing. Lauren walked in wearing the same gray suit she'd worn on the first day of trial. It didn't fit her the same anymore. She looked exhausted, older, like she'd aged 10 years over the previous few months. The judge confirmed that both parties had received the written ruling and asked whether there were any remaining issues requiring clarification. My attorney answered no. Lauren's attorney stood much more slowly. We respectfully preserve our client's rights regarding any available post-judgment remedies. The judge nodded. Noted. That was it. Months of litigation, thousands of pages of documents, dozens of witnesses, hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, reduced to less than 10 minutes. As everyone stood to leave, Lauren turned toward me for the first time in weeks. "Ethan," her voice cracked. "I never thought you'd do this." I looked at her for several seconds. "No, you did." She shook her head. "You could have stopped." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Stopped what?" "Destroyed us." I almost laughed. "You destroyed us the night you decided someone else deserved the life we built." She didn't answer. Instead, she quietly asked one final question. "Do you hate me?" I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the hotel, the money, the courtroom, the months of pretending. Then I gave her the only honest answer I had left. "No. I just don't know you anymore." She lowered her head. Neither of us spoke again. I walked out of that courthouse carrying nothing except a leather briefcase containing the court's final order. As the elevator doors closed behind me, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Ryan. Only one sentence. Only one. "There's something about Lauren you still don't know, and I think you need to hear it before this is truly over." All right, so where was I? Less than a week after Ryan and I had that final conversation, a certified letter arrived from Lauren's attorney. I signed for it at the front door, carried it into my kitchen, and just stood there staring at the envelope. I already knew it wasn't going to be an apology. Lauren didn't apologize. She explained, she blamed, she rewrote things until she became the victim. That was her thing. Still, I opened it because ignoring legal documents is how people end up getting screwed twice. The letter said Lauren intended to challenge the judgment. Her attorney claimed new information had surfaced, suggesting Ryan's cooperation had been improperly influenced. According to them, his testimony was unreliable because I had supposedly paid him to turn against her. They demanded financial records from me, my attorney, and several business accounts, claiming there may have been an undisclosed agreement between Ryan and me. I read that section 3 times. She was accusing me of bribing her lover. Honestly, the insanity of it almost made me laugh. I called my attorney immediately. He listened while I read the letter out loud, then went quiet for a few seconds. "Did you ever give Ryan money?" "No." "Promise him money?" "No." "Pay any of his debts?" "No." "Offer him employment, business, property, or anything else of value?" "No." "Good," he said. "Then let her file." That answer surprised me. I expected him to sound worried, but he sounded almost bored. He explained that Lauren couldn't simply dislike the result and demand another trial. She needed credible evidence of fraud, misconduct, or some major legal error. Accusing us of bribery without proof wasn't enough. In fact, making a false accusation could create even more problems for her if she submitted it under oath. 3 days later, she filed anyway. Of course she did. Her motion claimed Ryan had only testified because I had secretly agreed to rescue his failing business. She included screenshots of messages in which Ryan and I discussed meeting after the divorce. That was it. No payment records, no contract, no witness, just 2 men arranging to meet at a diner. My legal team responded with everything. My bank records, Ryan's bank records, sworn affidavits, phone records, emails showing Ryan hired his own attorney before giving evidence, invoices proving he paid his own legal costs. Most importantly, Ryan voluntarily provided full access to his business accounts. There wasn't a single unexplained payment from me, my companies, my lawyer, or anyone connected to us. Then my attorney found something even better. Lauren had contacted Ryan after the judgment. She offered him money to sign a statement saying I had pressured him. When Ryan refused, she increased the offer. The messages were brutal. You already destroyed my life. At least help me fix the financial damage. Just say Ethan promised to help your business. Nobody can prove otherwise. I can pay you once the court reopens the property decision. Ryan had ignored the first few messages. Then he replied with one sentence. You are asking me to lie under oath again. Lauren answered, I'm asking you to tell the court what it needs to hear. Man, when my attorney showed me that exchange, I just sat there rubbing my face. She had filed a motion accusing me of bribing Ryan while actively trying to bribe Ryan herself. It was so unbelievably stupid that I couldn't understand how she thought it would work. The judge scheduled a hearing. Lauren appeared with a new attorney. Apparently, her original legal team had withdrawn shortly after reviewing the messages. That should tell you everything. Her new lawyer tried to argue that she had been emotional and desperate when she contacted Ryan. He said the messages weren't a serious offer, just the words of a woman under extreme stress. The judge wasn't interested. He asked Lauren directly whether she had offered Ryan money in exchange for changing his testimony. She tried to explain. The judge stopped her. Yes or no, Mrs. Carter? Her voice was barely audible. Yes. And at the time you made that offer, had you already filed a motion accusing your former husband of essentially the same misconduct? Lauren stared at the table. Yes. The judge denied her request almost immediately, but he didn't stop there. He ordered Lauren to reimburse a significant portion of the legal fees I had spent responding to the baseless motion. He also warned her that any further attempt to submit knowingly false evidence could result in sanctions far more serious than financial penalties. That was the real end. No appeal, no secret agreement, no hidden fortune waiting for her. After the final debt allocations, reimbursements, attorney fees, tax obligations, and the loans tied to assets assigned to her side of the estate, Lauren walked away with almost nothing she could actually use. The few assets connected to her were either heavily encumbered or had to be sold to satisfy obligations. The luxury lifestyle she had promised herself disappeared before it even began. People sometimes ask me whether she was literally homeless. No, she wasn't living under a bridge, but compared with the $7 million life we had built, she had nothing. No ownership in the operating company, no apartment buildings, no investment portfolio producing income, no beach house, no multi-million-dollar settlement. She moved into a small rental apartment outside Dallas and took a salaried position with a property management company. The last time I heard anything about her was through a mutual friend. Apparently, she told people I had stolen her future. She still described the divorce as something I had done to her. She never mentioned the affair, the hidden spending, the fake documents, the lies under oath, or the attempt to buy Ryan's testimony. Ryan disappeared from my life too. His contracting business eventually collapsed, and he moved to Arizona to work for another company. Before leaving, he sent me one final email. It wasn't long. He apologized again and said he hoped we'd never have a reason to speak after that. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him. I just didn't need anything else from him. As for me, I kept the company running. I sold 2 properties that carried memories I didn't want anymore, and reinvested the money into projects Lauren had once called too boring. I moved out of the house we shared because every room felt like evidence. The new place was smaller, quieter, and honestly better. For the first few months, I barely slept. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning convinced there was still another message, another account, another lie waiting to be discovered. Eventually, that feeling stopped. About a year after the divorce, I ran into Lauren by accident at a restaurant. She was sitting alone near the bar. I saw her before she saw me, and for a few seconds I considered turning around and leaving. Then she looked up. We stared at each other across the room. She looked normal, not evil, not broken. Just normal. That was probably the strangest part. She walked over and asked how I was doing. Fine, I said. She nodded. I heard the company's doing well. It is. Another silence. Then she said, I wish we could have handled things differently. I looked at her and honestly tried to think of something kind to say, something that would give both of us closure. But closure isn't some magical sentence. Sometimes it's just realizing there's nothing left worth discussing. You had a lot of chances to handle things differently, I said. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. I did love you. I believed her. That's the messed up part. I think she did love me, at least in whatever way she understood love. She just loved money, excitement, and the version of herself she imagined becoming more. I loved you too, I said. Then I walked away. I didn't turn around to see whether she was watching me. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt nothing except relief. And after everything she took from me before the divorce even started, nothing was exactly what I wanted her to have left of me.